Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our monthly session for supporting students with disabilities in virtual environments. We can see the participant count is continuing to tick upwards, so we understand it may take another moment or so for folks to enter the Zoom webinar and kind of get settled. But we will try to get started quickly today. The hour always flies by, and we're super excited to have a new guest with us today, joining Dr. Bateman and our friend from Kansas, Sean. We've got a new guest for our monthly webinar. Dr. Kavita Rao is joining us all the way from Hawaii this month. So as you're getting settled, I just want to point out that chat has been disabled for this session just due to the size of our audience. However, if you have a question that you would like to pose to any of our panelists, you can drop that in the Q&A tool. We may not be able to pause during the presentation to address it directly, but we hope to have a moment or two at the end of the hour to answer some of those questions. And panelists, if you're comfortable with it and you're not speaking, if you want to view those questions and respond using a text response, please, we encourage you to do so. Also, as we're getting settled, my colleague Ethan Pan is here with us, and he, I believe, has just put into the chat message, the chat box, our shared notes that we use every month that contain lots of links and resources. But he's also dropping in a PDF file, a handout specifically from Kavita that will be referenced during today's presentation. So you can follow along with her in real time. We will be sharing her slides after the session, so don't worry. They will be added to our Google Doc and our Schoology course, so you can see all of the extra additional resources and opportunities and materials that she's taken the time to bring together for you. So without spending any more time wasting that from you, Dr. Rao, we're so honored to have you, and we'll kick it over to you to start.
All right, thank you so much, Sarah and Ethan and Patton, for giving me this opportunity to present here today. It's still morning here in Hawaii, but I'm excited to be in Pennsylvania virtually with you all. And today I'm going to focus, as the slide says, on digital tools and instructional strategies for the blended and fully online classroom. So let's go back about 9 months to March 2020. It's hard to believe it's only been 9 months, but that's when we all started this mass experiment in sudden online learning, where we all just jumped right into online learning for K through 12. And I remember in those first weeks of the kind of global lockdown, I was getting all these emails about amazing tools to use for online learning. There were like 350 resources, 75 tools you can use. So every day my inbox was popping with more and more. And it was overwhelming, even though I've been teaching about using technology in education for more than 20 years, I was finding it overwhelming to wade through all the different resources that were there. And as teachers, you were probably doing the same thing. I'm imagining that you are hearing about these new tools. Many of you probably by this time are using all of these different tools. But I remember in March, this was new to many of us, or we had used them for face-to-face classes, but had to figure out how to use them for online classes. So I found myself answering a lot of questions about what should I use, which tool should I use when? And as I started thinking about the different tools that teachers were starting to use online, I thought of ways that we can think about these tools strategically. So rather than just using a tool because you've suddenly heard about it, or somebody your co-teacher is using it, or you've heard somebody using it, I started to think about how can we really think about strategic ways to embed these tools, especially for blended and online learning. And one thing to do is think about the digital tools that you are introduced to. How can you use them for teaching, and how can you use them for learning? So when you're using tools for teaching as teachers, you're often doing things like using the tool to design curriculum, develop what you're teaching, use it to facilitate instruction online. And then on the learning side, the same tools can be used to support students, to engage them, to help them be creative, to help them demonstrate what they know. So in today's webinar, what I'm going to do is really focus on how you can use various digital tools for both these purposes, for teaching and for learning. And one of the things that digital tools have always been amazing at is addressing learner variability. So learner variability is basically the concept that all of our students have varied needs and abilities and preferences and strengths. And so although I'm going to really focus in today's webinar on ways that digital tools can support students with disabilities, many of the strategies that I talk about will support all learners in the classroom. It'll support your students with disabilities, it'll support your English language learners, it will support your students who just need different ways to learn. So as I'm going through this webinar, think about how some of these strategies might be great for all of the different learners in your classroom. And what I'm going to cover today is the strategic thinking about using digital tools. And so first, starting with considering the varied needs of students in your classroom, then thinking about where the barriers come in. What are the things about learning that are challenging to students? And then thinking about how you can use instructional strategies along with digital tools to address those barriers. So this chart here, it's not intended to be all the barriers that that can arise for students, but these are just some common ones that come up in the classroom. And as teachers, you've all seen these. You've seen these, over the years in the face-to-face classroom. And I've kind of broken them down into 3 categories. Some common academic challenges often arise around reading and writing, and this can then go into other classes and become challenges in things like science and social studies and math. And another area of challenge can be with executive functions, which is about processing information, organizing, getting yourself through the tasks that you have to do. And then learning behaviors are about behaviors of learning like motivation and persistence and self-regulation. And this chart that I'm showing you here is on page 3 of the handout if you'd like a copy of it. Now, when you think about these challenges, they've become different and even sometimes more in the online environment. They've really changed in the online environment. So now as we're designing for both online and blended environments that we've been in for the past 9 months and that we might continue to be in for some more time, it's important to think about how are the things that were going on in my face-to-face classroom, how have the challenges changed or become more in the online classroom, and what can we do? So today's webinar, I'm really going to talk about addressing some of these barriers with digital tools. I'm also going to talk about the digital tools from a UDL lens. And I know if you were in the November webinar with Dr. Smith, he talked about engagement in particular, the UDL principle of engagement and some of the things that you can do. So I'm going to drill down further with some strategies and digital tools for engagement. And I'm also going to cover the other 2 principles of UDL, which are representation and action and expression. And again, I'm not going to go very deeply into actually teaching about UDL today because I only have an hour. But if you don't already have a copy of the guidelines, you can find the guidelines at this URL right here, udlguidelines.cas.org. This is also linked on the handout if you want it for later. So again, what I'm really going to focus on today are strategies to support students. So my goal for today's webinar, I'm not going to try to teach you a bunch of digital tools. What I'm really going to do is focus on strategies related to digital tools and how you can use those strategies to address barriers. So whenever I show you a strategy, I'll have on my slide some of the tools that address the strategy. And again, I won't be going into how to use the tool itself. On my handout, I do have some instructional videos for many of the tools. But one of the things I do want to, the reason that I don't focus on the tool, but on the strategy is because our digital tools keep evolving. By next year, there's going to be new and interesting things. In 5 years, there's going to be more different and new tools. And the key, I think, for us as educators is to think about whatever those are strategically and think about how the tool reduces the barrier. So again, that's what we'll really focus on in today's, for the rest of the webinar today. So I'm going to start with the UDL principle of providing multiple means of representation. And I'm going to start with some ideas to support representation online. So I'm going to cover 2 specific areas of supporting representation online, which is making input comprehensible and supporting reading and comprehension in the online environment. So I'm going to start first with the concept of input. I actually think input is a really interesting concept because input includes the actual content that you're teaching. So that could be whatever information you're teaching from textbooks and presentations and the resources that you're having students visit. But input is also all of the teacher talk that happens. So when we're in the traditional face-to-face classroom, the input is all the things that the students are getting from you speaking, their peers speaking, the educational assistants speaking, including and as well as all the content that you're teaching. So when you think about input in the online environment, there are some additional challenges that beyond what happens in the face-to-face environment. The teacher talk has become more text-based, most likely, because you're not right there to talk to them. You're probably putting more things up on Google Classroom or Seesaw or whatever platforms you use. And what's happening for students is they may not be able to ask clarifying questions right away. Whereas in the classroom, they can just look at you and ask you what if they need the input clarified for them. They also have less opportunities to look around and check in with their peers. The teachers and aides might not be there to help them as well. So input has become a different thing in the online environment. The other thing with input to consider is that parents and families really need to be able to assist the student with that input. So if as a teacher, you've given directions in a text format or you've made a video for them to watch, parents and families also need to be able to watch and access those things and help their children with that, with understanding the input. So I'm going to talk about a few strategies to use to make input more comprehensible online. One of this is the strategy to use technology for teaching. So this is providing clear directions for whatever you're asking the students to do. And this is actually kind of a no-brainer. It's kind of a simple thing to do, but it's a one-page at a glance sheet for the exact things that you want students to do to get into an activity. So for example, here is this image here is directions that I provide for my college students. When I have them use a new technology, I create a one-pager with screenshots of how to get into the thing to begin with. So that can bring down the anxiety of like, what is she asking me to do? Because sometimes if the students don't know how to use the tool or access the tool, that can create a lot of anxiety, and they're not even getting to the content part of what you're asking them to do because they're not even really sure how to access the tool or the technology that you're asking them to. So in this image, I have an example of how you can provide clear directions. It's one page. I took screenshots and then just wrote the directions of how to access a tool. I also recommend if students are using a new tool to do something online, I often give them an opportunity to do something easy first with that tool. I don't give them the actual assignment that I want them to do, but I'll have them make something with it using content they already know, like talk about your favorite pet or talk about something you already know about using that tool. And once they practice with that tool, then you can have them do the actual assignment, which is make a project on whatever you're having them do. So again, just the one way to make input comprehensible is just to provide simple at a glance directions the first time they encounter something new. And then building on that, you can add a multimodal element by also providing short narrated instruction. So I'm guessing many of you are already doing this because over the past 9 months, teachers have become really familiar with things like screencasting. But I just wanted to show some different ways to use screencasting. Again, for students who might be struggling with comprehending what exactly you want them to do, one thing you can do is provide a model for the assignment on how you want them to do it, and then use a screencast tool such as Loom or Screencastify or Screencast-O-Matic and walk them through the model to tell them what components you want them to have in their final product. So screencasts can be wonderful for providing how-to instructions about something, talking through a model, telling them what to do during a particular asynchronous instruction that you're giving them. So another strategy to make input comprehensible online is to take the information that you're teaching, the content, and chunk it. So rather than having students read a lot in one sitting or watch a long video and having to do something with it, you can chunk that information with questions. And a tool to do that, Edpuzzle, makes it very easy to do that. You can upload any video into Edpuzzle or pull from YouTube or whatever video source, and you can build in comprehension questions throughout. You can use open-ended questions, you can use multiple choice questions, you can have free write questions in Edpuzzle. So that is a wonderful tool to use if you haven't tried that one. But you can also create your own chunks. For example, if you have a set of Google Slides where you've got them looking through content, on one of the slides, you can embed a link to a Google form where they answer some questions, or you can embed a link to a Google Doc where they go and answer some comprehension questions. So that gives students a chance to go back and forth rather than have to go through a really long piece of information where they might be getting confused or not understanding things, and the input gets more and more confusing without opportunities to stop and think. And then finally, to make input comprehensible, another strategy to use is to provide a resource bank. And this is useful if you're doing things with your students where, for example, you're having them maybe do research on something. You want them to go to some websites, you want them to, maybe in the traditional classroom, you would have taken a trip to the library or gone to the school library and gotten some books about things. But now in the online environment, you're not able to be there to see which things the students are finding. You're not able to kind of guide them right away about whether those are the best websites to use. So one thing you can do for projects like that is provide a resource bank. And a resource bank is as simple as you sitting down and vetting the resources that might be okay for them to use. You might find some PDFs, you might find some websites, and then using something like Padlet or Jamboard, you can curate that information. You can put it in categories, and then you can then tell the students, go to this Padlet, and you can guide them depending on how much guidance they need. You can say, I'd like you to pick 2 websites from the website column. I'd like you to pick a video from the video column. I'd like you to read 3 articles. And of course, you can change those instructions too, depending. So if some students need more scaffolding, you can give them fewer things to look at. But again, you can vet the resources that they go to. This can also be really a fun thing to do where you start with the resource bank, and then if your students can find resources that they think are good, they send it to you and you add it to the resource bank. So they can see some of their really good resources popping up on the resource bank as well. So now I'm going to go into the second area of supporting representation online. And this is an important one. It's supporting reading and comprehension. Again, because in the online learning environment, students are doing a lot of reading on their own independently. And there's no one walking around to help them or ask questions right away. Again, there are less opportunities to ask clarifying questions. And the last bullet on that is important. When students are having trouble with comprehension or trouble with reading, they may not persist or engage. And again, in the face-to-face classroom, you can go around and give them support, sit beside them, check in with them. But if they're doing this at home alone without somebody monitoring, they might just give up and not finish the reading. So let's talk about some strategies for that. So the big thing with reading and comprehension is to really think about how we use digital text. So digital text is basically all the text that we see on screen. The neat thing about digital text is there's all of these things you can do with digital text to help students access it and get into digital text. But the key is that we give students the tools to make sense of the digital text. And this wheel right here has some of the support features of digital text that we can use. Text to speech is a big one where students can hear the text being read aloud. Dual highlighting is where students can, the words are highlighted in a different color as it's being read out loud. And then things like vocabulary, annotations, and highlighters are all features of digital text that can help support students. So this is one example of a literacy support tool, a digital text tool that I think is really fabulous. It's a Chrome extension. It's called Read and Write for Chrome. And on this screenshot, I'm just showing all the different features that Read and Write for Chrome has. On the handout that I've provided, I have more information, and there are some little instructional videos on how you can use some of these features of Read and Write for Chrome for instruction. I don't have time to go into that in great detail today, but I just wanted to point out that this is a really nice one for teachers and made by a company called Text Help. And then again, this slide has a lot of information that I don't have the time to cover, but I did just want to note that there's lots of different Chrome extensions. Many of these are free, and if they're not free, they're very, very low cost. But these can really help students access digital text. The ones on the very top, access and readability, it takes the clutter off the page so that students can read more easily. The decoding and fluency can help students actually read the text and it's read aloud to them. And the comprehension, there's many different ways that you can, digital text can give students comprehension supports. So again, this is a lot of information. And if you go to the handout, on page 1, section 2, I have some links to resources you can download with information on all of these, as well as more digital text tools that you can use. Now, the key to digital text, though, is just telling students that these exist doesn't do the trick, because often students are like, I don't know what to do with this. So if you are using some of these tools, and you don't have to use all of these, but if you pick a few that are useful for your students, what I would recommend is embedding some of these tools into authentic activities and getting all your students, giving them a chance to use the tool, whether or not you think it's useful for them. Give them a chance to play around and practice with it. And then give your students a chance to reflect on whether it helped them or not. So some of these tools are more helpful for some students than others. Some students may not find them helpful at all. So by giving students a chance to use it and then reflect on what works for them, that makes it, then they can decide, oh, I really like that tool. And then they can continue using it for other reading assignments and other assignments that they have. And then if it doesn't work for them, they don't have to use the tool. But the nice thing especially with Google Chrome, is that they can add all of the extensions that work for them and use them for anything that they're reading. And then the other important thing to do is that last bullet. If you're working with students and something is really working for them with these tools, make sure to let their parents know, so that their parents are also helping the students use the tool, or encouraging the students to use that tool when they're reading their homework or doing some of their independent reading. So hold on, sorry, I just skipped a slide. I just wanted to go back one slide here. This is a piece of software that it's called Voice Dream Suite, and it's available for mobile devices such as iPads and Android devices and iPhones. And I usually don't show a lot of tools that cost money. This is one tool that is so fantastic for kids, especially kids with literacy-related disabilities. This one is so fantastic that I just wanted to point out, if you do have a student who really struggles with reading or can use supports across their reading activities, this is a tool worth considering downloading and purchasing for those students. It uses all of the features of mobile devices. You can use the swipe features and all of those things to have the dual highlighting, to have the read alouds, to have the annotations and all of that. So I just wanted to mention that this is a really fabulous mobile device reading support for those students who can use it. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to give you about 60 seconds just to think through all of those tools I talked about, and just think to yourself, what is something that might help a student that you work with? So take a 60-second break and think about this question. Okay, I'm going to move on now to the second principle of UDL, which is providing options for action and expression. So we'll take a look at some ways we can do this online. So there's 3 areas I'm going to talk about. Giving students ways to demonstrate their knowledge in varied formats, providing opportunities to practice, and supporting task and time management. So for number 1, some of the additional challenges that happen online is that often students, if we give them an assignment, for example, in the classroom, we give them a written assignment, we've all been there where the students don't know where to begin. They might just be staring at a blank piece of paper. Now imagine that happening at home. What can we do to support them? So these are some strategies to help students with that, like freezing on where do I get started? I don't know what the teacher is asking me to do, and then you're not there to guide them necessarily in the online environment. So some digital tools and instructional strategies you can use for that. Um, One thing is using multimodal authoring tools. And basically that's just a fancy way of saying using tools that allow students to put things like photos and text and audio and video together. And you can use something as simple as Google Slides to do this, but there's also some good tools out there such as Book Creator. Book Creator is actually a really fabulous multimodal authoring tool. And UDL Book Builder is another one that you can use. And there's another one called Tar Heel Reader. So all of these allow students to put multimedia formats together. So this can be really wonderful, both in the face-to-face classroom, but also in the online classroom. It gives students a scaffold to put information together and express what you want them to talk about. For younger students, you can actually make books in Book Creator and then have them, you can share it with them online and have them add components. So you could ask comprehension questions, they could watch a video on the screen and then add a little audio response. So it's really wonderful because it can be an interactive book that you create for them and with them. For older students, they can make their own books, they can retell a story, they can create stories for younger learners. And of course, these don't just have to be stories, these can also be content. You can do science projects and social studies projects. So again, multimodal authoring tools are a wonderful way to give students the scaffolds for expressing themselves using a digital tool. Similar to that, these are also multimodal tools, but there's tons of creative tools out there. For example, creating infographics and comic books and animated stories. And I'm down at the bottom of there, I've given you some examples of different tools to use for these. But what these tools do is give students a fun way to present the key details of something that they're learning. So infographics are actually great, especially for if you're working with middle school, secondary, or high school secondary learners. This is a great way for them to take information that they're learning and think about the essential things they might want to present about something they've learned and make an infographic about it. It can also be nice and it can be authentic because they can pick authentic things like how to stay healthy or how to take care of the environment, and they get to actually make a flyer about it. And these interfaces like Pictochart and Canva, they have all these wonderful templates. So it gives students a way to be creative, express themselves, and in a little bit of a different format. And then finally, this one is something I've used actually quite a bit, the scaffolded collaborative slides, which is essentially just making a slide deck in Google Slides. And you can have, you can put a lot of your own scaffolds in there. So for example, one thing I do for middle schoolers I work with is I will make the slides and I will bound it to 6 or 8 slides and I'll put the headers on, and the students have to go in and build out the information on the slides based on whatever we're learning in class or the research that they're doing. And you can even have them work in groups because for online learning, they can all access the same Google Slides. And then they might use these slides to do something else. For example, if they're writing a report or they're doing a presentation, these slides become the basis for what they're doing, but it gives them a way to develop their ideas, and you can go into the slides and give them formative feedback or mastery-oriented feedback as they're creating the slides. So you're not waiting until they finish the presentation to give them feedback, but you're able to see what they're doing, intervene and help develop things if you're seeing that students need more information or are going in the wrong direction. The nice thing also is you can really vary what you want them to put on these slides. You can have them put pictures on it, you can have them put more text on it. So it becomes a really nice way for teachers to provide varied scaffolds in an online environment and in a collaborative format if needed. So the second area for action and expression is providing opportunities to practice. So again, in the face-to-face classroom, we do a lot of practice where you might be showing them how to do something, then they're doing it together as a group, and then they're practicing alone. And then that way, as they're seeing their peers do it, students might become more confident. Oh yeah, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. But of course, in the online environment, they're not able to do as much of that. You might be able to do some of that when you meet with them synchronously, but then when they're off the Zoom session or off the Google Meet session and working on their own, they might be like, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do. So here are some digital tools you can use to give students ways to practice information as they're demonstrating what they know. One thing that can really bring down anxiety is having students just record what they want to say. So if you have a writing assignment and a student feels daunted by that, one thing you can do is just have the student record short clips of what it is they might want to say or express or write about, and then they can upload those clips to you and you can give them feedback on that. So and also just saying what you have to say can reduce the threat of writing. So for some students, writing things down can be really nerve-wracking. So if they're just having to say it out loud in short clips, that can become a scaffold for writing without being as daunting as this blank sheet of paper. There's many different ways to record short clips of audio. There's audio apps built into our devices, like our phones and our tablets, and there's many things you can download for short clips. And then Google Chrome, there's lots of extensions for audio as well. And those can be shared with the teacher by uploading it into the LMS or emailing it to you or however you folks share information. Another way to have students practice is using tools like interactive whiteboards, such as EduCreations, or interactive presentation tools, such as VoiceThread. And often people think of using these as a culminating project, but I often use them as what the students are using as they're developing their ideas. So for example, students can do math problems using EduCreations and think out loud about their process. And if students share their math problems with each other, then they can see what the thinking process is. And you as a teacher can also look through the thinking process and give them feedback. Similarly with VoiceThread, you can have students upload a photo or they can make one slide and upload it and talk about it, and their peers can give them feedback. So again, it doesn't have to just be the culminating project for which you use these. You can use these as students develop their ideas and practice and expressing what they have learned. And the third area of action and expression is supporting task and time management. And this is a really important one online because in the physical classroom, in the face-to-face classroom, we do a lot of task and time management simply by walking around, by observing, by keeping our eyes on the students and knowing which students might need us to walk by and give them a nudge or talk to them after class. But we don't have that in the online environment. We're not able to monitor student progress in the way that we can face-to-face. We also may not have our support person there, for example, our educational assistant or our co-teachers to help with that. So students really need to be able to self-monitor more than they do in the face-to-face environment. And parents and family members also need to be able to know what the students are supposed to be doing and help them with time and task management. So I'll talk about a few digital tools you can use to support this. So one thing that I recommend doing is providing really clear directions. And again, this is very similar to what I said in the representation area, but this is about providing clear directions for something that might be happening over the course of a whole day or happening over the course of a whole week. And the key is to keep it simple and essential. So here's an example on this slide of a one-day lesson plan put together on a HyperDoc. So it's all the essential information in one document at a glance. And HyperDocs, you can lay out your weekly schedules, you can lay out your daily schedules or complex assignment directions again, at a glance. If you're interested in using HyperDocs, if you go to this website, hyperdocs.co, there's lots of different ideas and templates of HyperDocs you can use. And you can create these using things like Microsoft Word or Google Docs, so they're not very hard to create. But they can be really useful, not only to the student, but also to the parent. So a busy parent might be able to come over to the HyperDoc and be like, okay, this is how I need to help my student, my child manage their time or the task that they're doing. Another way to support kind of time management and self-regulation is to provide a weekly check-in. This is a strategy for a quick temperature check in an online or a hybrid class. So this could be something that you have every Monday morning or every Friday afternoon, where the students know that they're going to just answer a few questions about how they're doing, what's going on in a regular basis. The nice thing about doing something like a weekly check-in is that you're not waiting until a student is in crisis or in trouble, or things are not working for them. You can just check in and see how things are going along the way. This also gives teachers a way to check in and then communicate with parents proactively if needed. And you can change the questions on this. So for example, at the very bottom of this image, it says, this week I completed the following tasks. So you can change the different tasks on there for the given week so that you can kind of keep tabs of where the students are with their own learning and how they're feeling about things. And then finally, this is another strategy that I've used often, which is having students set their own goals. So this is especially good if you're doing things in your online class or your blended class that are kind of long-term. If you're doing a project that might span over a couple of weeks or a couple of months, or maybe a project-based learning project, what I would recommend doing is taking something like a Google Sheets, which is a shared spreadsheet, and you can put the major milestones that need to happen on the spreadsheet and have students log in and write down when they think they're going to complete the different tasks. Now so you might actually have a deadline in mind, and everybody, you want everybody to finish something by around January 14th, but the students feel like they make that choice when they put that down. They've actually been deliberate about putting that date down, and they can choose to maybe say, I think I'll do that a little bit earlier before the deadline. So it gives students a way to make some decisions about their own timeline, gives them a little bit more ownership. And you can also do things like color code. So when they're done with something, it can turn green, they're done. If a deadline is coming up, they can make it orange so that they can see that it's coming up. So this can be a fun way for students to kind of manage their own time. When if it's a shared sheet as well, they can see what their peers are doing. So sometimes students might be like, oh, everybody else is finishing this by January 21st, so I guess I need to do that too. So it gives students a way to set their own goals and track their own progress. Teachers can log in and track the progress. Parents can log in and also track and see how their students are doing. So this is a really nice way to give students some agency about their time management and help them set incremental goals as they're getting through a bigger project. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to stop for a minute, give you a minute to think about all of these different things I've thrown out, and think about a strategy that you might be able to use coming up soon. All right, now I'm going to go to our last UDL principle here. There's no real order of the UDL principles, but it's the third one. So we're going to talk about providing multiple means of engagement in the online environment. And I'm going to talk about two areas to support, which is one, developing self-directed learners and fostering interaction and collaboration. So I'll start with the first one. And some of the challenges with being self-directed at home is that there's no boundaries between class and home anymore. We've all seen that, where everything just kind of flows into one. So what can we do to give students some self-directed, some ways for them to know, okay, this is my school time, this is what I need to finish today. The other thing that can happen more in the home environment is avoidance of tasks that students don't want to do. Again, in school, they know that, okay, for this 50 minutes, I've got to do this, and the teacher's there watching me. But at home, things kind of blend and bleed into each other, and they might need more assistance, again, as with everything else, for this to develop this skill. So one digital tool that can be really helpful to help students with self-direction is shared checklists and reminders. And we have these kind of all over the place. We have them on our phones. We have these reminder apps and notes apps. There's lots of different apps and tools that you can use. One that I really like that many people haven't heard of, I actually hadn't heard about them until a friend of mine told me, Google Keep is a really nice one because it works on your computer and it syncs with your phone or your tablet. So Google Keep is a really nice way for students to, and it looks like Post-it notes. So they can make different color Post-it notes with categories and write what they have to do. And it syncs across their devices, and it can be shared with teachers and parents as well. So parents and teachers can also add to it. They can, and it has a nice little checklist format so students can check off what they've done. So that feels really satisfying. But again, if you don't want to use Google Keep, there's plenty of other apps on mobile devices that will help students do this. And one thing I really like about these types of checklists and reminders is if the students make it and keep it, if you have students who are, for older students, keep their own checklist, it's also giving them strategies to manage their own time and prioritize what they need to do. So it's also teaching them some of these time management skills. Sorry, I'm flipping around. Okay, my second strategy here is having students create self-models of things that they're good at doing. So sometimes having a self-modeling story can help the student highlight what they do well and really reinforce the things they're doing well. So these self-modeling stories can be done using video, or they can just be done using like Google Slides. You can have a photo story. And these actually, sometimes you think of these stories as maybe for younger kids, but this actually works really well for older kids too, because if you get them to tell a story about something they do well, who doesn't want to talk about something that they do well? So this is an example. I had my students who are college students, I had them do a self-modeling story as an example. And I had a college student who made one about how to prepare for a Zoom class. So she took photos about how she sets her alarm 3 times, how she wakes up, how she gets ready, how she has her breakfast, and she took a photo and added a caption for each one. So that can be really cool for students to articulate what they do well and at the same time reinforce the things that they do to be self-directed learners. And for younger learners, you can work with them to collaborate on the script of what they're going to show. For older learners, it's wonderful to let them plan and develop it on their own. And again, this can be done either by video or by using just photos and text. So it can be a really simple project. And it's also a really fun project for students to share with each other, because then they can see different regulation strategies and get ideas for what they can do. So the second area under engagement that I'm going to talk about is fostering interaction and collaboration. And of course, this is one that we all know has been really, really hard in this new online world. For a lot of students, working alone is no fun. It's really demotivating not to have people around, no peers, and no teachers to talk with. Also, what happens with this lack of interaction and collaboration is some students don't know if they're doing right or wrong. I mean, and so they can't really get quick feedback on, am I on the right track here? So that can also be demotivating for students. So I'll talk about a few strategies that you can use to foster interaction and collaboration online. So one thing that I recommend doing is using collaborative documents and providing mastery-oriented feedback. And this can be something as simple as using a Google Doc and giving feedback to students on the Google Doc as they're developing something. And I really want to focus on this concept of mastery-oriented feedback. I think it's one of the best things that you can do with online and blended learning is mastery-oriented feedback is a way to interact with students and give them feedback that's focused on effort rather than accuracy. And with mastery-oriented feedback, it's timely feedback. So they're getting the feedback soon. They're seeing your comments about what they're doing right. And if you want them to change what they're doing, you're giving them feedback towards where you want them to go, and potentially even models of what they're aiming for. So rather than feeling judged for doing something wrong, you're giving the student feedback of, this is how you can get closer to my expectations. And one of the things you can do, especially in the online and blended world where you're not able to interact with them right away, is give them that feedback and then encourage them to revise that thing and submit it to you. So again, it's not just a one-time feedback where they're getting a grade for it, but they're actually they're acting on the feedback that you give them. So some examples of things that you can use: Google Docs, of course, and Google Slides, you can leave comments very easily, but you can also use things like Kaizena, which is giving mastery-oriented feedback using text and audio comments as well, so that they can hear your feedback rather than just read it. Another way to foster interaction and collaboration is using tools such as Padlet and Jamboard. And you can post a prompt and you can have students respond using text or images and videos. You can have students share information that they find themselves. And the thing that you can also do with this is have students respond to each other. So this can become really fun for them when, with Jamboard, for example, people can make their Jamboards and their peers can go in and write post-it notes about it. So it's kind of like a gallery walk of the Jamboard where they're getting feedback and interaction from their peers. And there's also Flipgrid. I think most teachers by this point have heard of and are using Flipgrid, but this is a way you can post a video prompt and have students reply with video as well. And then teachers can also respond with video or text. So it gives students a different way to respond to things rather than just responding by text. So that's kind of fun for students if you do Flipgrid as well. And then finally, one way to foster interaction and collaboration is when you're having a synchronous meeting, if you're able to have things like a Google Meet session or a Zoom session with your students, I really recommend giving opportunities to break out into smaller groups, especially if you've got older kids. If you have really young ones, this may not work as well unless you have an assistant to go into every room with them. But if you've got older kids, you can break them out into smaller rooms and give them a focused activity. So this doesn't have to be huge, but give them small things to do in the room together and then come back to report on. What I also do is I really structure this, because sometimes when you send students off into a breakout room, if they're not sure what they're supposed to do, they might get kind of lost. So I will make a Google Doc with clear directions about what they're doing in the breakout rooms, and they have to write something on the Google Docs related to what they talked about. So that way it's very clear for them what they have to do. And when they come back to the main session, we can look at each other's Google Docs and what they've developed. And if you're working in a situation where the software you use doesn't have breakout rooms, one thing that I've seen teachers do is just plan for smaller meetings online. So you can meet with a group of 3 students online and do the same thing, just so that they're getting that interaction with each other and not only seeing each other in these big class sessions where they may not feel as comfortable interacting with each other. Okay, so with that, I know I just threw a bunch of different strategies out at you. I'm going to kind of wrap this up together, and I think we will have a little bit of time for questions as well. I'm looking at the time. We still have a little bit of time left. So basically, these are some of the guiding questions that I recommend asking when you're using digital tools for blended and online learning. The first question to think about when you hear about a new tool, should I use this tool? Think first about what your instructional goal is. What are you doing for this lesson? And then think about what the learner needs to be able to actually do and what skills they need to master. So the way you use the tool should really be linked to the instructional goal. Don't just use the tool because it exists. But then the next question to ask is, what are some of the barriers that students might encounter while trying to reach this goal? And which tools can I use that reduce those barriers? So that is, when you think about using digital tools and the barriers, then you can think about the instructional strategies that I've just talked about today to reduce those barriers along with the instructional, along with the digital tools. And very often digital tools are engaging to students just because they're interactive and they're multimodal. But the key for us as teachers is to think about how to use them in ways that actually support the learning goals. And then looking ahead, one of the things that we all know is that technology keeps changing. Sometimes I'll go back into a website that I've been using and it's gone, or that tool that I've been using for a long time disappears. So I think the key for us as teachers and as educators is to remember that the technology will keep evolving. It's going to get better and easier. There's going to be more things that we can do. But the key for us is to think about the features of the tool that really support the students and bring down barriers, and then think about the instructional strategies that we can use with the tools to support the students in their learning goals. So again, as you hear about new tools in the future, rather than asking yourself, okay, how am I just going to use this? Think about, maybe go through the tool, play around with its features, figure out which features might be supportive, and then think about, oh, these features might really support my instructional goal. So that's one way to look at the tools when, again, you hear about new ones. So finally, this is just kind of my last slide to wrap things up. Remember to support learner variability with digital tools. Start with the goal and not the tool. I really recommend modeling when you're using new digital tools with students. I really recommend modeling it for them. If you have are able to have synchronous sessions, you can model it online with them. If you're not able to have synchronous sessions, you can create things like those how-to sheets or those screencast sheets so that they can see how to use the tools. Number 4, digital tools are wonderful for giving students flexibility on how they express themselves and how they work through things. And then number 5 to me is really important. Sometimes you don't have to use every single digital tool that's out there. Sometimes less can be more. Picking a few good tools and using them well is more powerful sometimes than using all the different tools that get thrown at us over time. All right, so that is basically all I have today. So I think we do have about 10 minutes for question and answer. So Sarah or Ethan, do you want to jump in and let me know if there are any questions that I can address, or Sean?
Hey, Kavita, I'm going to jump in with the first one if possible. So one of the things that you did in terms of your illustrations is talked definitely along the lines of the UDL guidelines. So one of our participants brought up, though, the issue in terms of accessibility, particularly in the area of sensory and physical. And wonder if you wanted to respond to that in respect to, you offered examples, but of course, I think that was just an example with the idea of a continuum of potential tools, realizing some of the tools and examples you offered would have potentially sensory limitations for individuals, let's say, who are blind or who are deaf. So wonder if you wanted to take that more, I hope I offered in terms of a little clarity, I could offer a direct question there, but I'll stop for a moment. Did that make enough sense?
Yes, and thank you, Sean. That's actually a really important distinction to make, which is that using all of these tools alone are not reducing all the barriers. So using these tools with strategies will reduce some barriers, but we do need to consider the continuum of things that are going on for students. So you might be using a tool, but the tool itself might have its barriers as well. So if you do have students with specific disabilities that need accommodations, it is something to consider, that not just using the tool alone may not increase access for all students. One of the things about UDL is it increases the range access for a greater range of students, but we still need to think about students for whom we might need to provide specific supports. So I don't know if that answers the question, Sean. Is that?
Well, yeah, for me, I was thinking about some of the examples you offered, like, for example, the notes and the narrated notes, where you were offering further instructions, you were offering opportunities for them to, via video, go back and listen again, rewind, etc. Well, the video itself may have some limitations for some. The idea in general is a nice design and planning tool. To me, it seems like the tools you'd use to offer that support, it might be an audio file for individuals that need it, they're blind. It might be making certain you have closed captioning for individuals who are deaf. It would be those types of components, but the idea in general seems like, well, of course we need learners to go back and relook at things and rewind and potentially pre-teach, and that's where that video example you're offering seemed to be very relevant. Maybe I'm asking and answering the question at once. So, Sarah, other questions you're seeing popping up?
So Ethan and I have been posting links and things into the chat window. One that we've hit on already is just the fact that Kavita has shared so many resources with us today. A copy of the slides will be posted very soon to our shared notes doc. A recording of this webinar will also be posted, and the handout and the slides will be made into an accessible PDF as well, just to make sure that we're supporting everybody's needs that way. As far as content questions, I haven't seen anything else pop up that we haven't addressed specifically. I'm wondering, Dr. Bateman, if there's anything you would ask Kavita for clarity on, or you think would be for the good of the group?
Not right now. I think what she did is she did a great broad sweep of what we need to cover. Is what we need to do is figure out how we can make sure that we continue to use the resources that she very nicely covered but throughout the next 6 months as we continue to talk about this.
Dr. Bateman, I don't know if you do that intentionally, but you set us up for success, right? We've mentioned in the chat window a few times already that our team is available. We have virtual office hours scheduled monthly, as well as we're always available to set up one-on-one appointments for Zoom or phone calls to speak about specific tools that have been referenced or strategies for supporting or meeting individualized needs. We also know that this month's webinar will lead us really nicely into January's topic, where we're going to actually do a deep dive into one of the guidelines that Kavita hit on today, and we're going to explore more the specifics under the student engagement of that guideline. Kavita, we really value and appreciate your time, and boy, did you make the most of it. Any other kind of closing thoughts or maybe takeaways that you really want people to be mindful of before we share our attendance?
Sure. I think I maybe will make one point as a closing. I think one of the things that this year has been a swirl for all of us. We've gone to online. Some of you might be in blended. We've done all kinds of things. We're wondering when we're going back to the classroom. One thing I would like to emphasize about all of the strategies that I've shown you, I really focused on the online and learning environment and barriers, but all of these strategies you can pull back into the face-to-face classroom, obviously. I think the big point that I'd like to make is that when you're using digital tools and instructional strategies, the thing that I'm passionate about is thinking about design. So how can you design whatever you're doing, designing the instruction, designing the lesson, and using those tools with intentionality. So again, as you move back into the world where we're back into face-to-face classrooms, everything that I shared today will be relevant as well for face-to-face classroom and using technology as well. So I just kind of wanted to end with that.
Thank you so much. We've already gotten some kudos to you in the question and answer. So and on behalf of everybody, I don't know if you were so dialed in. I don't know if you saw, but I think we had almost around 250 folks with us this afternoon at the end of a very busy workday. So just it goes to show the value of your information and your expertise. As we mentioned, January session, the registration is now live on the Patent website. And the registration link is also embedded in the shared notes doc. I believe my wonderful colleague, Dr. Pan, is putting into the chat window the long form link for attendance. So if you would like to receive Act 48 credit for today's session, please make sure that you submit that Google form before midnight today, so 11:59 p.m. And then if you're interested in access for our Schoology group, where we kind of archive all of the webinar recordings, including today's, as soon as possible, and all of those accessible PDFs and attached files from today's webinar and previous webinars, those are available there as well. We'll stay in the room for a few minutes to make sure that everybody has access to that attendance link. And if there are any other final questions, please pose them. But otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us. We hope that you have a wonderful and safe winter season, and that we see you again in early 2021 for our next session.